Put your hands together for Scott Griffith. Thank you, Scott.
So let's start with a round of applause for my friend Todd Conklin. Wasn't he fantastic? Yeah. So when Charles came up to me this morning, he said, is there anything you'd like me to say? And I said, well, no, Charles, except that I always seem to make people uncomfortable. Now, as opposed to my good friend Todd, who nobody gets upset when Todd speaks. He's such a warm, engaging character. But for me, I always seem to whenever I speak, I have these awkward silences in between, when I talk. And so I wanted to explain to Charles that part of my learning objective here today is to actually make you uncomfortable. Because if I have one unique talent, it's that I'm really, really good at asking dumb questions. It seems like all my life, I've been the guy in the back of the room that looks up and says, I don't understand. And from that has come, for me at least, an amazing journey of learning by asking dumb questions. So when I started when I told Dean Smith, the title of my presentation was Collaborative High Reliability and Collaborative Just Culture, he replied to me, I'm not sure that has enough pizzazz. So he said, why don't we add the words, the logical, measured way to that? And I thought, well, then we might as well put up a picture of Spock, because actually during the pandemic, my girlfriend and I decided we had never watched the original Star Trek series, so we went and watched the whole thing in sequence from the beginning, and she started calling me Spock. And first I thought it was a term of endearment, and then I came to realize that she wasn't complimenting me. She was telling me that I'm too logical. But I'm going to start with a logical disclaimer that this is a technical, socio-organizational presentation, and I'll describe what that means. And during the course of our conversation, I intend to bring up several events that most of you will be familiar with. And in the course of that dialogue, you may be uncomfortable because I'm going to offer some perspectives, maybe even an opinion or two that might differ from yours. And this is not, I say this from experience because I've presented here a number of times. I can't count, Charles, how many times I've been here, maybe 5, maybe 6. And I remember the first time I came years ago, I had a hard time remembering the acronyms, the HBRCT. Remember that old term? And I didn't even know what it stood for. And the first year I was speaking, I went to the lectern and I was talking and I said, forgive me, what's the title again? HPRCT. And they said, Human Performance and Root Cause Trending. And without thinking, I just said, well, that seems kind of silly. And they said, why? And I said, because, well, I don't believe in the term root cause analysis. And they looked at me and said, well, several of our people here have companies with root cause in the title of their companies. I said, well, I'll save them a lot of trouble because all root causes can be traced back to bad parenting. And I got awkward silence, and a couple of people I think maybe got up and walked out. And I thought, no, I don't mean to insult you, but causality implies proportionality. And at some level, there's a cutoff that says, well, this was a cause, a root cause or a trigger event. But I prefer the term, the contributor analysis. I think there are many contributors to adverse outcomes, and we'll describe what some of those are. But I'm going to shy away from using the term root cause as we go forward. Now, the second thing I want to say is when I came back the next year, maybe 2 years later, I made people uncomfortable again because I was talking and I said, just hypothetically, as a rhetorical question, what would happen in the transportation industries if we just did away with the National Transportation Safety Board? We just stopped investigating plane, train, and automobile accidents. Everybody got really nervous. And I said, why are you upset? And somebody said, well, Scott, that later in the day, the NTSB chairman is going to close this day. You're opening it, he's going to close. And I said, well, even better, because he happened to be a friend of mine. But everybody was very uncomfortable that I was trying to put the NTSB chairman out of business. And when I saw him at the cocktail party, he agreed it would be a great thing. But my point was, investigating adversity after the fact, which is a necessary evil, we have to do that, would you agree is not the best way to prevent accidents going forward? Because the way the plane crashed yesterday, or the way the patient died, or the way the nuclear reactor began to melt down will likely, the odds are probabilistically very different the next time. It's like trying to look in the rearview mirror while you're driving the car. So I made people uncomfortable. So finally, over the years, the organization decided to change the name from HPRCT to CHOL. And I said, well, great. Now I got to learn another acronym. Community, did I get this right? Community of Human and Organizational Learning, right? Okay. So I thought I rehearsed that, and I came and I thought, I'm not going to make the same mistake of not knowing what it means. So I checked in last night, and as I checked in, I said, I'm here for the Community of Human and Organizational Learning. It's called CHOL. I don't know, maybe it's CHOL. I don't know how you pronounce it, but that's what it is. And the receptionist said, I'm sorry, sir, that event is not here. And I said, what are you talking about? And she said, we have an HPRCT meeting that's scheduled. And I have to tell you, to be honest, I thought, well, maybe there's been an insurrection and the people who voted to change the title, see, nobody laughed then, but were more traditional, and they wanted, so if you go check into the hotel desk, they will tell you that it's an HPRCT conference. So with that in mind, I already can tell I'm succeeding in making you a little bit uncomfortable. Okay, so I want to start with a question of why are we still where we are? And this, I'd love to take credit for that. I think it's a great quote, but it comes from a colleague and a friend of mine named Tammy Allen, and she is the head of the auditing division of a company called DNV, Danish Norse Veritas is the term. It's a European consortium. This woman knows about it. And I'll describe my relationship with Tammy and with the company that she represents in just a moment. But she had this brilliant observation, or question actually, of why are we still where we are? Now, I'm going to talk about a few of these events only for the purpose of inspiring us to learn more and to push the envelope further, to not think traditionally, but to move our efforts in a direction that is evidence-based. And I'm going to start with COVID. You all heard about this little virus called SARS-CoV-2. Well, interestingly enough, about the time that this made the scene in Wuhan, China, and the World Health Organization alerted the CDC, there was a lot of discussion about what is this new virus. And the epidemiologist and the sociologist and the experts in those two organizations made a mistake. And I want to come back to the term mistake later, but I'm going to say it was a mistake because they made the assumption that SARS-CoV-2 would propagate in a similar way to the SARS virus. And if you may remember, in 2003, we had an epidemic that we were hoping not to become a pandemic called SARS. And I knew this because at the time I was a chief safety officer at American Airlines, and we were quite concerned about the spread of that virus on international flights. So the solution, the technical solution at the time, the socio-technical solution, was for the security officials in the Asian gateway airports, so for where the virus originated, would take people's temperature in the security lines. The understanding was that to be transmissible, to be infectious, that you would present a fever or some temperature elevation. And it was pretty effective. In fact, it did a really nice job of preventing what we now would call in COVID a pandemic. But that was our essential barrier. Now, they did other things, but they came out with Tamiflu. You may have heard that. That's a brand name for an antiviral, but Tamiflu was at the time still brand new. And but our most effective way to measure it was through measuring people's temperature. So at the time, the CDC said it's not known exactly, but it's presently thought and understood that those who exhibit symptoms are the ones that are contagious. Well, looking back with the benefit of hindsight, we all know today that in fact, we do believe the majority of the transmissions are either pre or asymptomatic. Do you understand my message here? Pre or asymptomatic. Now, what that tells me, and I'm going to illustrate something we call the collaborative high reliability model, is that we miss the first step, which is seeing and understanding the risk. Because I will contend you can only manage what you see and understand. And you may remember from my talk here in 2019 that I told the story of a plane crash that I witnessed. And the professional lesson that I took from that was the pilots of that plane. It was a Delta 1011 crash at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport on August 2nd, 1985, was because they couldn't see the wind field. They could see rain, but rain didn't bring that plane down. It was a microburst phenomenon that was invisible to the human eye and invisible to their onboard radars. But, oh, by the way, let me just ask, in 2019, I asked you to do something, and I want to see if anybody, raise your hand if you were here in 2019 in person. Okay, okay. Let me just ask you, if you raised your hand just now, if you were here in 2019, keep your hand up just for a minute. I'm going to make you uncomfortable. Keep your hands up high. No, hey, come on, please. She's going. Okay, no, raise your hand up high. Okay, now I'm going to ask you a question. I ask you, because remember at the time you were called Human Performance and Root Cause Trending. And I said, how many of you are from HR in the room? And not a hand went up. Oh, come on, keep your hands up. I want you, that's not the question I'm asking now. That was what I asked in 2019. So I said, how can you have a conference that describes human performance, forget the root cause trending, just the human performance, and we don't have HR in place? And you all seem to nod your heads, those of you that have your hands up. And I said, okay, next time we have a conference, it turns out it was 3 years later, I said, bring someone from HR. So keep your hand up if you brought someone from HR. Gosh, dang it. Nobody listens to me. All right. Okay. Did you bring someone from HR? Excellent. Virtual hug. You're my new best friend. Okay. Now, I'm going to say next time, I'm going to give you another challenge, and I want to hope to make you a little bit uncomfortable. We're here to talk about, one of the things we're here to talk about is high reliability, right? Can you be highly reliable without investment? Without investing the resources to manage the risks that you identify? Can you be highly reliable without an investment in resources to manage it? How many of you are CFOs? How many of you are chief financial officers? Oh, gosh, nobody. So, by the way, about 2 months ago, I was invited via Zoom to speak to a group in New York of healthcare professionals called HFMA, and you can look them up. They're in New York, and it's all across the state it stands for Healthcare Financial Managers Association. And so I was invited to be the guest speaker on high reliability, right? Now, I was kind of skeptical that we would get any attendance, and they have, I don't know, 300 members maybe. Well, on my Zoom call, 8 showed up. And I thought, oh, I was just deflated. Until the president said, no, this is like Woodstock. They said, we had a conference here last year and nobody came. They didn't think they were invited. So what I'm suggesting to you is that if you're going to continue to discuss terms like high reliability and just culture, bring a team from your organization. Don't come solo, bring a team of people from the operational unit, the safety unit, quality, risk, whatever you come to represent, and bring your financial folks, bring your human resource folks, because if you're not collaborating with those folks, you're going to be the lone voice trying to convince them. Actually, you're going to be speaking a different language than they understand. Does that make sense to you? Okay, that's one of the criticism I've gotten when I speak, is I ask this question too much. And I know it's irritating. I say, does that make sense? Kind of the Spock approach. So I'll ask it another way. How does it make you feel when I say that? When I say bring a CFO or HR? Okay. Do you see the point? Okay, good. All right. So let's move off of COVID for a moment. Oh, by the way, so everything we did downline, from vaccines to masks to social distancing to barriers, everything we did downline, socio-technical, on the system or the human side, was less than optimal, because we didn't understand the nature of the transmission in the beginning. Does that make sense to you? I want you to hold on to that. If you don't, and the hard thing about virus transmission is you can't see it. If we could see it in the air, like cigarette smoke in a late night bar, we would put on a mask when it's present, but we don't. We don't see and understand. That's a metaphor for everything we're going to talk about, whether you're in transportation or medicine or other fields of healthcare or finance, whatever you're trying to manage reliably. If you don't see and understand it, at least know that you don't see and understand it, nothing you do downline sociotechnically with your systems or with your people is going to get you to optimization. That's the first principle of high reliability. All right. So now I'm going to talk about redundant. Now, I know we have healthcare. I know a few of you personally. Raise your hand if you work in healthcare. Okay, so if you have raised your hand, you know who Redondavat is. There's no question in your mind. So for the rest of you, she was a nurse that worked at Vanderbilt Medical Center that went to a Pyxis, which is a brand name of a medical dispensing cabinet. She put in the name of a drug. I won't bore you with the title, but it started with V and E. And what it was a sedative because this patient that she had was going to go into, I think, an MRI, some sort of radiology testing. And they, you know how you get sometimes claustrophobic inside when you go into an MRI? Okay, so she was going to give her a sedative. She goes to the picture, she types in 2 letters, Victor Echo, VE. A drug name popped up. And it said, are you sure you want this one? This is a high alert medication. She said, yes, she overwrote it. And it turned out to be the wrong drug. It was a paralytic drug. Paralytic drug she administered to the patient. Then she got called away on an emergency, a code, in the hospital, and the patient died, paralyzed. Now, subsequent to that, there's a whole string of events that happened, and I won't bore you with all those details, but I will say the relevant facts are, at some point, the hospital fired her. The hospital fired her, and the dominoes started to fall. When the first domino fell, it was when the medical center fired her. When the second domino fell, when the Tennessee Board of Nursing realized that she got fired and it became a public event, the nursing board revoked her license. When the nursing board revoked her license, the district attorney in Nashville got wind of it because it was in the news, and they decided to prosecute. It goes to jury trial. She was convicted. And finally, a judge said, wait a minute, even though there was a conviction, we're going to offer probation, which is a suspension of the sanction or the penalty. Now, have you heard the term just culture? Have you ever heard the term just culture? Raise your hand if you've heard it. Okay, now raise your hand if you can define what that means. Okay, you, sir, the one in healthcare. Okay, equitable accountability approach. I would agree with that. So you've defined it as an equitable accountability, equitable between the organization and the individuals who work there. Okay, do you think that what you heard and read in the news that day, that it was a just culture, that they lived up to just culture? Okay, how many of you have a just culture in the organization that you work? I don't see a lot of hands. I see a couple of half-hearted hands, but I don't see anybody saying, oh, me, Scott, call on me. I'm going to tell you I have a just culture. You know why we don't see a sea of hands? Because we haven't defined it at the organizational level. We haven't Are you familiar with ISO principles and general quality management principles? And part of the bedrock of ISO quality management is document, monitor, measure. Would you agree with that? Document, monitor, measure. Are we documenting, monitoring, and measuring the reliability of our just culture efforts? Okay, I'm going to show you how to do that. I'm going to show you how to do it. But I want you to think, everybody wants to live in a just culture. I do. But we have to be able to document, monitor, and measure if we're going to prove that we can do so reliably. Because the universal feeling is that on that day, Vanderbilt Medical Center did not live up to people's expectations of a just culture, and they claim to be a just culture organization. Now, I will say there has been a focus on the criminalization of human error. I don't think that's the problem. DAs do what the DAs do. And I used to make a lot of jokes about attorneys until my daughter got accepted to law school. But attorneys do what? Not attorneys. attorneys represent the system in which they work, either criminal or civil justice system. What's the purpose of the criminal justice system? What's the purpose? I'm sorry? Uphold the law. Okay. Would you disagree with me if I said the purpose of the criminal justice system is not to manage risk? Because if it were to manage risk, it is outcome biased by definition. You don't get charged, you don't have standing in court until you have shown harm. Yes, sir.
I was just going to say that it's. What was I going to say?
That's
Well,
okay.
their intent is to present evidence with the intent to assign blame.
Yeah. So in the criminal and also the civil justice system, there's an issue of justice and fairness, how we sometimes compensate to make remedies. But if our purpose is to manage risk, to prevent adversity, the legal system is sorely inadequate to do that, because we wait until someone has been harmed. If the criminal justice system didn't have the obligation or the duty to go in and examine that Pyxis that she worked at before the event occurred. So I would suggest to those of you that are in healthcare, we shouldn't be, let me rephrase this. If we say the issue is criminalization of human error, we've missed the mark. That was the third domino. The first domino was the medical center itself, the hospital. The second domino was the regulator. The third domino was the DA, and the fourth was the jury. I have no issue with the criminal justice system because they're not experts at managing risk, but the hospital should be. The nursing board should be. I'm not blaming the DA. I'm saying let's look ourselves in the mirror in the organizations we work in and represent. Are we living in a just culture? And I don't think we can say yes right now. I think just culture has been promoted as a philosophy without documenting, monitoring, measuring. Are you nodding your head, or do you agree with that? Okay. Are you uncomfortable with me saying that? No? Okay. I got one friend in the group, so I'll take that. All right. So now, would you say that, I love what you said about mutual accountability. Would you say that there is just as much accountability? By the way, do you think that's the only nurse that has ever overridden a drug at that Pyxis? No. Do you think it was the only one that had done it that day? No. Do you think it was the first time she had done it? No. Do you think the hospital saw and understood the risk that they were tolerating inside their organization? That's a question, isn't it? That's a question. Do you think, how many of you are engineers? I know we got a bevy of engineers. Raise your hand if you have an engineer. Any one of us, I'm not an engineer. I'm a physicist, so there's a little tension between us here. If you're an engineer, you'll get the joke. I have to do that. So I'll tell you a joke. This is actually not a joke, it's a true story. Bill Gates, a couple of weeks ago, went to the UK, and the first thing he said was to his audience, I'm so happy to be here in person. It's been a long time. I'm so glad we don't have to meet on Zoom. I mean Teams, he said. I mean Teams. Half the room got it. So you can explain to the others on the break why that's funny. Okay, so engineers and physicists, any one of the engineers in the room, if we teamed up with Todd Conklin, could go before this event had happened, and we would have at least seen and understood a risk that was present. Would you agree with that? And you don't even have to be clinical, although clinical expertise helps immensely. You don't even have to be clinical to ask dumb questions. Why is a paralytic drug in this location? Why can a nurse override it? If a nurse overrides it, what are the consequences? Who is monitoring and measuring this risk? We can ask the dumb questions. Do you see the point? Now, the nursing board has the responsibility to do what? To manage the nurse's license. Well, here's the illogic of, I'm feeling like Spock looking at Jim and saying, well, this is illogical, Captain. The nursing board has the responsibility only for the nurse's license. How can the nursing board make a judgment on the nurse and her actions if they don't understand the nature of the system, the environment, and the culture in which she worked. Well, the pharmacy board controls the PICSs. The medical board controls the process of doctors and nurses ordering and administering. The hospital is regulated by the Joint Commission and by the Department of Health. But guess what? In that event, there were separate investigations: nursing board, pharmacy board, medical board, Department of Health, Joint Commission. And by law, those organizations in many states are prohibited from sharing their individual investigations with each other. It's the opposite of a collaborative approach. So we don't need to be complaining about the criminalization of human error until we can look ourselves in the mirror at the organizational and the regulator level first. Okay, I think I've sort of provoked you enough. I hope that that doesn't make you feel too uncomfortable. I could go into more detail, but I'm looking at the time. I have 24 minutes left. I want to say, I live in Texas, and the state that produces 12% of the US energy needs, in February of 2021, had a near total collapse of the electrical grid. Now, Mike Blevins, who knows more about energy generation, distribution, and retail sales than I'll ever know about any topic in my life, I called Mike and said, Mike, can you tell me what happened? And he was kind enough over Zoom. We spent, what was it, Mike, at least 2 hours. You were so generous. I can still see, I took copious notes. I took notes, several pages of notes, and he explained all the nuances. And were we literally seconds, some few seconds, I don't know how many, away from a total grid collapse? Would that be fair, Mike? Yes, okay. And now, had that grid collapsed, estimates are that it would have taken, I don't know, 10 days to 14 days to fully re-energize the system, some geeky number like that. But I listened to Mike and I thought, wow, Mike, engineers abound in your field. Engineers abound. Don't engineers know what reliability means? Oh, yes, he understood barriers, redundancies, recoveries. He described all the engineering principles. And I said, but Mike, how can it happen with probably the world's best engineers? And he said, well, it was organizational, or I'll use the P word. It might even be political. We're going to talk about organizations in politics. And we shouldn't shy away from it because we live in a socio world, but the engineers, and Mike actually told me, I predicted we would have a shutdown. He said, but I predicted it would happen during hot weather, not cold weather. Is that correct, Mike? Did I get that right? Now, yes. We can do probabilistic risk assessments. We can predict ahead when things are going to happen. And it takes not just the engineering science, it takes the human factors, and it takes the organizational sciences too. But we have to be able to do this in earnest if we're going to prevent that shutdown. Now, I could talk about the MAX 737 MAX 8, and I don't want to go into great details about it, but I will just say this. You've heard of the MCAS computer. You all know what that means. I think it's maneuvering control augmentation. Some lawyer wrote the name of it, by the way, I'm sure. So maneuvering. It's what keeps the airplane in the air, because the airplane over time, which was designed in the 1960s, has been stretched dramatically with different engine thrust capabilities. So it has controllability factors. Specifically, when there's so much power on that armament, it will actually lift up, and the pilots can't be fast enough to control it if it goes wrong. So this computer, which operates without pilot input or even alerting to the pilot, was a single failure path. Now, everybody engineer in the room knows what that term was. A single failure path. Something critical relied on one computer called the MCAS being 100% reliable. Now, is there any engineer in the room that buys the myth of 100% reliability? No. Raise your hand if you believe in 100% reliability for any electromechanical system. No. So why would we have only one computer? How many would we need to be reliable? Well, we need more than one. How many did you raise your hand? How many fingers did you put? Not two. Yeah, not two. Why not two? You've heard the expression, man with two clocks never knows what time it is, or you need at least 3 redundancies to see which one is the odd unit out. Okay, so there's that. And now here's the one that gins up so much emotion. It's so much emotion in all of us. And all I can say about that is we have to deal with the politics. We have to deal with the politics. What I can tell you, sociotechnically, we can build Boolean fault trees and do something called sociotechnical probabilistic risk assessment, because there isn't one single solution that's going to lower that risk. There are a multitude of solutions that have to be considered and applied thoughtfully and in the right way. Now, I don't have time to go into what that would be. Now, this, by the way, if you're trying to read the wording on this model, it's not on gun violence. It was on actually COVID. But there are methodologies available to us as scientists to accurately predict what areas of our intervention can actually lower the risk substantially within our tolerance. But that becomes, as always, a political debate. And I'm urging all of us to move our representatives beyond the politics and treat gun violence as a public health crisis, because it is. By any measure known, it is a public health crisis. Okay, so let's look at what I've been calling the collaborative high reliability model. You might know there's a TM on it. We own the registered trademark, but it's not meant to be proprietary in the sense that we don't want you to learn it. We want people to recognize the collaborative high reliability model is not the same model you'll see in most academic books. It's not the just culture model you'll see in most academic books or algorithms. I'm going to show you the approach. I'm going to go pretty fast because we only have 18 minutes left. This came about from my experience in aviation, where we saw a somewhat dramatic reduction in fatal accidents starting in 1959. That was driven by the advent of jet engines, which were exponentially more reliable than propeller-driven aircraft with lots of moving parts. But then over time, we plateaued. We plateaued in a very meaningful way. We applied a lot of things, a lot of solutions that turned out to be modestly effective, but we achieved a rather dramatic reduction in the mid-1990s when we started shifting, what I call flipping the iceberg. And instead of waiting for the plane to crash and investigating, we started looking at the data every day. And the data comes in 2 categories, digital and human. Which is more important? They're both equally important. So we have programs called Flight Operations Quality Assurance. We have a program called ASAP, which I authored in 1994. There are 767 ASAP programs in the US today, and they're growing. But this is the key takeaway from this slide. Those 767 ASAP programs are audited, documented, and monitored to a common standard. It's not this just culture philosophy. It is a program that is documented, monitored, and measured. And the approval is only good for 2 years. That's why ASAP today has flourished after I left aviation in 2006 to go off and speak to you and healthcare and other groups. It has continued reliably because it is a program that is documented, monitored, and measured. Documented, monitored, measured. Okay. So the new model and taxonomy, this is 35, actually it's now 38 years of my life on one slide. If you see anything wrong with it, please tell me, because I don't want to have to go back and relive it all, but here it is. Instead of focusing on adverse events or incidents or near misses, and by the way, near misses is a fallacy. We don't report near misses reliably out of self-interest. Do you believe me? She's shrugging her shoulder. Okay, let's play a game. I'm your insurance agent. You drive a car, don't you? Okay. What's your first name?
Chris.
Chris, is that your real first name?
That's my real first
Okay,
name.
okay.
Well, sort of.
Okay.
Actually,
Okay.
we
So
won't go
Chris,
there, but yeah, that's what I go by.
we'll go with Chris. All right, Chris, I'm your insurance agent. Would you call me if you have a near miss while driving your car? Okay, you're hesitating. Okay, would you call me if you drive over the speed limit or change lanes without
No.
signaling?
Probably not.
But you questioned me when I said humans don't reliably report near misses. We don't if we worry about the thank you, Chris. That's
Okay,
all.
thank
All right. Now, which is a better predictor of Chris's probability or likelihood of having an accident? Her past driving record or the way she drives her car every day? How fast, how hard she brakes, where she drives it, all of those activities. Now, I know this because in aviation, we started monitoring flights on a routine basis. And I won't get into the differences between your insurance company, which will give you a price break today, but you're still not calling them when you have a near miss. You're just not, because you're worried about your rates going up. But the focus shifts from accidents, incidents, and near misses to risk identification and management below the surface. It's looking below the surface. And here's the one that's going to make you feel uncomfortable. It does not start with just culture. It starts with the systems, then the people, and then the organization. Those steps are sequenced. It's called the sequence of reliability. See and understand risk first. Improve and manage your systems to be reliable. Improve and manage people. And I say people because that comes in two categories. Not just human behavior, but what we call performance shaping factors. And the reason you need HR here today is because behavior management is different than performance management. Do you see that? I don't have time to go into detail here, but go back and talk to your HR and they will say, oh yeah, well, you as a safety professional or risk or quality or reliability expert should be familiar with it too. Human performance comes before human behavior. If you don't train me, if you don't give me the right equipment, the right tools, if I don't have the right cultural environment, if I don't have all those performance shaping factors lined up, judging me on my behavior won't get you what you want to get. It won't. You can take the license away, you can fire them, you can execute them. You haven't solved the problem. You've only driven it underground. So this is the sequence. And from that, this model is based on it. Now, I've got 12 minutes and 56 seconds, so I'm going to kind of rev it up to 78 RPM. Safety is only one attribute. Quality, operational integrity, financial responsibility, diversity, equity, inclusion, privacy and customer service, depending on the industry you work in, those may be in different relative balances. But I can guarantee you, if you go into a hospital, and every one of us will at some point in our life, you care about privacy, you care about compassion, you care about how the hospital treats you as much as you care about your safety. You will care about all of those. So when we're talking about a hospital that's trying to be reliable, yes, it has to be safe for the employees, the patients, and the visitors, but it has to also live up to other attributes. So the same principles apply. Don't think about this as safety only. And I have to believe that most of the time at these conferences that I've attended, safety is the value or the attribute that's most often referred to. Just know that it's never your only attribute. It's never your only attribute. Okay, so how we go? So that relates to the departments you work in. You have to be able to see that the safety department or a risk department or a quality department or the operational units and finance and certainly HR have to be centered around the same principles of reliability if you're going to be effective. Because what happens when something goes wrong? You'll have separate investigations by HR to decide what to do with the nurse's employment, with safety to look at the systems. You see what I'm saying? Doesn't it sound a lot like what I described the regulatory boards do in healthcare between nursing, medicine, pharmacy, Department of Health, and CMS and Joint Commission? Well, be careful that in your organization, and I'm going to make every safety professional uncomfortable here, when you start your safety investigations, I know you do this because I did it when I was the chief safety officer. You tell the person being, well, we use the term investigated. Doesn't that sound pretty scary? When I'm being investigated by the safety department or HR or a regulator, when you do your fact gathering, is what we call it, fact gathering, you say as a safety professional, you can be honest with me because we're not here to do discipline. We're only going to look at the system. And the employee goes, okay, so here's the rule. I can be honest with this person, but now in an hour, somebody from my boss is going to come, can fire me. And then HR may come in later and a regulator may come take my license away. Do I have to say different things to different people? Do I need legal representation? You see how illogical that is from a scientific perspective? I'm going to show you really quickly a better way. We want to get the big rocks in the jar first. You've heard this. If you haven't heard it, Google it. You can see it. It's really good. But the person who did it, the university professor, was trying to say, in your personal life, get the big things in first. Because everything else, the little rocks, the sand, the water, all of that, if you want the big rocks in, you got to get them in first. So during the pandemic, I had a lot of time, as Todd pointed out, to think things through. And I said, well, the two big rocks are these. We want a just culture. Would you agree with, raise your hand if you agree with me on this? I need your participation. Would you agree with my belief that you will not become a highly reliable organization without a just culture environment? Would you agree with me on that? Okay. I just don't think you can, because you need employees to be your eyes and ears, and they're doing the work. If they don't feel they're being treated fairly, consistently, and just equitably, I don't think you're going to get what you want. At the same time, would you agree with this statement? Can a group of consultants come in and make you reliable? You know, that would be absurd. And most of us are consultants at some level. Would you need a core team internal to your organization that's trained not just individually, but as a team to function? And shouldn't that team include HR, finance, operations, safety, risk, quality? Shouldn't it? And shouldn't they be trained to integrate in what they do? And shouldn't they be documented, monitored, and measured? We developed what we believe is the world's first collaborative high reliability model. And the first two steps, we call them qualification steps, leading to a third step, which is certification down the road. But I'm showing you my aviator bias. I have a certificate, but I get qualifications on it. I can fly a 767, but I can't fly an L-1011. I can fly international, but I can't fly here. Those are qualifications. The first two qualification audits are a collaborative just culture program. That's a P on the end of that. Program, not a philosophy, a program that is documented, monitored, and measured. It has executive support. It has policy. It has training. It has tools. It has method, and it has sustainment. It can be audited to a standard. And oh, guess what? The people that audit it can't be the ones that taught the organization how to do it. Why? Because that's a basic principle of reliability. Independent verification. Independent verification. So our two big rocks are, the first step is collaborative just culture program, followed by a reliability management team. And those are independently audited by DNV. We have licensed them to use our model, and they are out there today in multiple industries auditing to those two qualifications. Now, I want to talk about ASAP because, again, I told you earlier, the reason ASAP is successful, in my view, is that it embraced a program approach that is documented, monitored, and measured by the FAA, the independent regulator, but it's based on something that we call today the triad model. The triad model in aviation is actually regulator, airline, and labor association. That forms the triad. Since 2006, I've been working in hospitals and other industries applying the same approach inside the organization with operations, HR, and a safety, risk, or quality department. But when Nurse Redonda Vaught discovered that she had misadministered the medication, in our model, it would have triggered a triad review with safety or quality or risk. They sometimes refer to those similarly. HR, who was involved in employment decision, and the operational unit. Those three would have required to have been achieved a unanimous consensus. Unanimous consensus is an important element of the ASAP program. It's not 2 out of 3. And oh, by the way, when you go to a jury trial, whether it's a 6-person or a 12-person or whatever the number, why do we require unanimity? Why don't we just say a simple majority? Because we believe that unanimity drives reliability, don't we? If it was a simple majority, the decisions might look very different. Now, at the end level of the Supreme Court, we can't get unanimity, and there is no appeal to the Supreme Court, at least in our country. So we're forced by circumstance to have to go with a simple majority. But you see, it's based on unanimity at the lower levels. Well, in ASAP, that's the way it is. And we have a tool that we believe is unique, and we believe this tool is balanced, and it is different than other just culture tools that you see out there. But I'm not here to promote the tool. I'm here to promote the process and the program. Without a program that's documented, monitored, and measured, without a method and a team and a tool, you won't be reliable. Or you might be reliable today, but tomorrow, all bets are off. So we're suggesting that there can be a way to become sustainably reliable. And we train people at different levels. We train them based on their function, whether they're instructors, mentors, fact gatherers, process facilitators, or members. We train different people at different levels, from an introductory level to an operational proficiency level to a subject matter expertise level. And oh, by the way, there's a very important concept that healthcare hasn't quite caught on to, which is it can't be one and done training. It has to be proficiency based. You know the difference? See, one and done training is what we did when we got our driver's license, right? Now, unless you got a ticket and had to go back to driving school, you haven't gone back for recurrent training, have you, since you got your license? That's not the way your pilots that fly your airplanes are trained. How would you like it if a pilot said, yeah, I got my license when I was 18? Been a long time. You wouldn't get on an airplane with that person, would you? So proficiency-based training in a just culture environment is absolutely essential. Because you can't say I got trained 10 years ago and I still am current. You have to, that's an aviation term, current. You have to be proficiency-based. All right. Well, now, organizational reliability. I got 2.5 minutes and this is the challenge. I'm going to do it. I'm going to bring this plane in on time. Organizational reliability is influenced by a number of factors, systems and the people that work therein, along with external factors like weather, the environmental conditions, perceptions of risk, internal and external, leadership, all of those play a role. There's actually a more robust model that's in my book that says there are factors affecting systems, factors affecting humans, and oh, by the way, what are organizations? Nothing more than combinations, socio-technical combinations of systems and people. And they can be deconstructed and understood, and you can manage them reliably in a sequence. Now, we created a little taxonomy because I looked across multiple industries and I saw all these different terms used interchangeably that meant different things. And I said, okay, stop the madness. I'm just going to create one that says there are activities that you do that don't have to be documented. There are activities that you do, and that's what I would place. Most just culture activities are one and done training without any kind of measurement. There are processes that become more formal, like a step-by-step or a checklist or a work card, but that requires documentation. Anytime you require documentation and process, you can start to measure it. Activities you don't measure. Processes can be measured. Programs are an alignment of related processes and other components. Systems are an alignment of programs, processes, and other components. And finally, integrated systems, which we don't see very often, are coordination of aligned systems, programs, policies, process, and components. Does this make sense to you? Look, these words aren't written in stone. It's our approach. It's our taxonomy. We go in and you'll notice at the top are the 4 steps to the sequence of reliability. See and understand risk, system reliability, human reliability, and then organizational reliability. When Mike told me all of the system reliability efforts that were in place in the Texas electrical grid, and I said, well, how come it still went down? it was because organizationally, we weren't reliable. Our systems were designed to be reliable. Our people were trained to operate them reliably. The environmental conditions came, but look, those environmental conditions weren't unpredictable, were they? They might not have been common, but it wasn't unpredictable. We failed on the organizational reliability side. We failed at the end with the brightest, probably the best engineers in the world, or at least arguably so. We failed organizationally. And I'm not pointing the fingers at any one group, but I'm saying you have to agree we organizationally failed. Okay, last thing I'll say is there's an evolving model of regulatory oversight. Regulators have to be independent. They just do. They have to be independent, but they can't be compliance-based alone. They have to rely on the expertise that resides inside the industries that they regulate. And oh, by the way, in our advancing modern world, that expertise gap is growing daily between the regulator and those that they regulate. That doesn't mean we should give up. It means that we should figure ways to collaborate and preserve their independence. This is the paradox. Regulators need to be independent, but rarely do they have the expertise to manage what they don't understand. So you find a way to blend independence and compliance with expertise and quality safety management systems, and most importantly, a collaborative high reliability. We have regulators that have come to us wanting to become qualified in collaborative high reliability as a regulator. The steps are an organization has to be accredited first. The next step is to be independently audited, both the team, reliability management team, and the collaborative just culture program. And then, and only then, is an organization prepared to go forward and build out a reliability management system and ultimately become certified. This is my last slide. We are becoming the high consequence industry standard for organizational improvement. We will accomplish this through independent program qualification standards, which have not existed until now. We will help align the legal, regulatory, and other reporting incentives that are not in place today, and we will build organizations an integrated system of risk reporting, analysis, and we will focus not only on corrective action, which in healthcare means discipline, not so in other industries, and preventative action, which is where all the improvement lies. Not in the correction, in the prevention. That's what our vision is, and we hope that we could help share that information with you. I mentioned last time, you can download a PDF copy of the manuscript. We're in final negotiations with our publisher that should be, the book is being picked up by one of the top 5 trade publishers, and we hope to have it published in 2023, but I can provide you a manuscript at any time if you like. Okay, that's my presentation. I missed my mark by a couple of minutes. I'm so sorry. I turn it back to Charles and the rest of the group, and I hope if you are uncomfortable, it's a good thing, but if it's not, I'm here to help explain myself and understand your position. Thank you all.